The sharp crack of a rifle echoed through the valley, sending a flock of startled birds into the azure Colorado sky as Rebecca Daniels crouched behind a fallen log, blood trickling down her arm from a fresh wound. It was May 1875, and at 26 years old, Rebecca had just survived her second attempt on her life in as many months. This was not how she had envisioned starting anew in Georgetown, Colorado, but fate seemed determined to remind her that peace would never be hers to claim. "Damn it all," she muttered, tearing a strip of fabric from her petticoat to bind the wound. The bullet had only grazed her, but the message was clear: they had found her again. Rebecca checked her own revolver, counting the remaining bullets with practiced precision. 3 left. Not enough if there was more than one pursuer. The cool mountain air filled her lungs as she listened intently for approaching footsteps. Her heartbeat gradually slowed, and the forest around her settled back into its natural rhythm. Whoever had shot at her wasn't giving chase, at least not yet. Rebecca had arrived in Georgetown just 2 weeks prior, hoping that the burgeoning silver mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains would offer the anonymity she desperately sought. After fleeing Texas with nothing but the clothes on her back and the haunting memories of her past, she had managed to secure a position as a schoolteacher in town, using forged references and a carefully crafted story about being a widow from back east. The truth was far more complicated and dangerous. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Rebecca made her way cautiously back toward town, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main road. Her small cabin sat on the outskirts, providing both solitude and a quick escape route should she need one again. Inside, she bolted the door and methodically checked every window before allowing herself to sink into the single wooden chair at her table. In the dim light of a single oil lamp, Rebecca unwrapped her makeshift bandage and properly cleaned the wound, wincing as she poured whiskey over the angry red gash. 5 years on the run had taught her rudimentary medical skills, among other necessities for survival. A knock at the door froze her in place. "Miss Daniels, it's Sheriff Miller, just checking if you're all right. Heard some shots out in the woods earlier." Rebecca quickly rolled down her sleeve to cover the wound. "Just a moment," she called, ensuring her revolver was within reach before opening the door just enough to reveal her face. "Evening, Sheriff. I'm fine, thank you. I was inside preparing lessons for tomorrow's class. Perhaps hunters in the hills." Sheriff Miller, a gray-haired man with kind eyes that had seen too much, nodded slowly. "Could be. Just wanted to make sure. Town's protective of its new schoolteacher." He tipped his hat. "You'll let me know if you need anything, Miss Daniels, of course. Good night, Sheriff." As she closed the door, Rebecca leaned against it, closing her eyes briefly. She couldn't risk drawing attention, couldn't afford to have anyone looking too closely into her background. Tomorrow she would teach her students as if nothing had happened, ignoring the pain in her arm and the fear that never truly left her. Because Rebecca Daniels knew better than most that the past never stayed buried, especially when that past included a dead husband, a corrupt Texas Ranger, and a bounty on her head that ensured she could never stop running. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of pristine Colorado day that made the mountains seem even more majestic. Rebecca walked briskly toward the schoolhouse, nodding politely to townspeople along the way. Her arm throbbed beneath her high-necked blouse, but years of practice had perfected her ability to hide pain behind a composed smile. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building that served Georgetown's 30-some children, ranging from 5 to 16 years of age. Rebecca had quickly established herself as firm but fair, earning the respect of both students and parents despite being new to town. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," called Mary Jenkins, one of her older students who was sweeping the schoolhouse steps. "Good morning, Mary. You're here early." "Ma says industriousness is next to godliness," the girl replied with a smile that revealed a missing front tooth. Rebecca nodded appreciatively as she unlocked the schoolhouse door. "Your mother is a wise woman." As the morning progressed, and the room filled with children reciting their lessons, Rebecca found herself repeatedly glancing out the windows. The unease from yesterday's shooting had settled in her bones, making her jumpier than usual. During the midday recess, while the children played in the yard, she found herself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see the glint of a rifle barrel. Instead, she saw dust rising from the main road into town, heralding the arrival of riders. This wasn't unusual. Georgetown was growing rapidly due to the silver boom, with new miners, merchants, and fortune seekers arriving weekly. Rebecca watched without particular interest until the riders came into clearer view. There were 5 of them, trail-worn men leading packhorses laden with supplies. Cowboys, by the look of them, though what business cowboys might have in a mining town, Rebecca couldn't guess. They rode with the easy confidence of men accustomed to days in the saddle. The lead rider caught her attention. Tall and broad-shouldered even at a distance, he sat his horse with natural grace. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but something about his posture made Rebecca's breath catch. There was a familiarity to him that sent a chill of apprehension through her body. Turning abruptly, she called the children back to their lessons, pushing thoughts of the newcomers from her mind. She had more immediate concerns than a group of passing cowboys. That evening, Rebecca avoided her usual stop at the general store, not wanting to risk encountering the new arrivals in town. Instead, she hurried directly to her cabin, relief washing over her as she secured the door behind her. The wound on her arm needed fresh bandages, and she set about the task mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Who had shot at her yesterday? Was it a random attack, or had her past finally caught up with her? And if it had, how long did she have before she needed to run again? The questions circled in her mind like vultures as she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. She was just sitting down to eat when another knock came at her door. Rebecca froze, her hand automatically reaching for her revolver. No one in town knew where she lived aside from Sheriff Miller and the school board chairman. She approached the door silently. "Who's there?" she called, revolver ready. "Blake Sullivan, madam. I believe I found something of yours in the woods." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know any Blake Sullivan, and she certainly hadn't lost anything in the woods except perhaps some blood and her sense of security. "I don't know what you mean," she replied cautiously. "A strip of fabric, madam. Looks to be from a lady's petticoat. Found it by a fallen log about 2 miles east of town. There was blood on it." Rebecca's breath caught. He had found her makeshift bandage from yesterday, but why bring it to her? How did he even know it was hers? "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I don't think so, Miss Daniels. I also found tracks, and signs of someone taking cover behind that log, right around where shots were fired yesterday afternoon." Rebecca's mind raced. This man was either remarkably observant or had been tracking her specifically. Neither possibility offered comfort. "If you found evidence of gunplay, you should take it to Sheriff Miller," she suggested. A low chuckle came through the door. "I already spoke with the sheriff. He suggested I might want to speak with you directly, seeing as how I've been hired to help with security around these parts after some recent troubles with claim jumpers. Name's Blake Sullivan. I'm no threat to you, Miss Daniels." Rebecca hesitated, then cracked the door open just enough to see the man standing on her porch. Her breath caught. It was the cowboy she'd seen riding into town earlier, the one whose posture had seemed familiar. Up close, she could see why. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the weathered features of a man who lived his life outdoors. Dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, and his eyes, a startling blue, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. But it was the star pinned to his vest that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "A deputy's badge. As I said, Mr. Sullivan, I can't help you. Good evening." She moved to close the door, but his boot prevented it from shutting completely. "Madam, if someone's taking shots at you, I need to know about it. It's my job to keep folks in this town safe." "Remove your foot from my door, Mr. Sullivan, or I will remove it for you," Rebecca said quietly, raising her revolver just enough for him to see it. To her surprise, the man smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." He withdrew his boot. "But whoever's after you isn't likely to be as accommodating as I am. When you're ready to talk, I'll be at the sheriff's office." As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him, curiosity getting the better of her caution. "How did you know it was my petticoat?" Blake Sullivan paused, looking back over his shoulder. "I didn't for certain, but I noticed your sleeve is rolled down despite the warm day and you're favoring your right arm." Combined with the schoolchildren's chatter about their teacher looking pale today, it wasn't a difficult conclusion to draw. He tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Daniels. Do try to stay out of the line of fire." Rebecca closed the door firmly, her mind whirling. This Blake Sullivan was observant, dangerously so. If he could deduce so much from so little, how long before he unraveled the rest of her secrets? Sleep eluded Rebecca that night, her thoughts alternating between the mysterious shooter in the woods and the even more unsettling deputy who had appeared on her doorstep. By morning, she had made a decision. She would stay one more week. If nothing further happened, perhaps it had been a random attack after all. If not, well, she was well practiced at disappearing. The schoolhouse was unusually quiet when Rebecca arrived, the children subdued as they took their seats. It didn't take long to discover why. "Miss Daniels," said 10-year-old Thomas Wilson, "is it true there's a killer in the woods targeting womenfolk?" Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Where did you hear such a thing, Thomas?" "My pa was talking about it at breakfast. Said a lady got shot at in the woods, and the new deputy thinks it might be that Texas killer that's in all the newspapers." A cold weight settled in Rebecca's stomach. "There are often exaggerated stories in newspapers, Thomas. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about right here in Georgetown." But as the day progressed, Rebecca noticed more whispers among the children, and when she stepped outside during lunch, she saw several mothers had come to escort their children home early. The town was on edge, and somehow her incident in the woods had become public knowledge. As she dismissed the remaining children at day's end, Rebecca spotted Deputy Sullivan leaning against a hitching post across the street, watching the schoolhouse. When their eyes met, he straightened and crossed over to her. "Miss Daniels," he greeted, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Rebecca glanced around, noting several townspeople watching with undisguised interest. "It seems you've already had plenty of words, Deputy Sullivan. Half the town is talking about shootings in the woods." "That wasn't my doing," he said, his voice low. "Sheriff Miller mentioned it to the blacksmith, who told his wife, who told the entire town," Rebecca finished for him. "And now everyone thinks there's a Texas killer lurking about." Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting that you mentioned Texas. I don't recall specifying where this supposed killer might be from." Rebecca realized her mistake immediately. "The children mentioned Texas newspapers. I assumed that's where the story originated." His gaze was penetrating, and Rebecca had the uncomfortable feeling he was looking straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Walk with me, Miss Daniels. I'd like to discuss security measures for the schoolhouse." It was a reasonable request, one she couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. Reluctantly, Rebecca fell into step beside him as they moved away from the curious onlookers. "You're not from back east, are you?" Blake said once they were out of earshot. "I don't see how my origins are relevant to schoolhouse security," she replied stiffly. "They're not, but they might be relevant to why someone's shooting at you." Rebecca stopped walking. "I never confirmed that I was the one shot at in the woods." Blake's smile was patient. "You didn't have to. Your reaction when I brought it up last night confirmed it plenty." He gestured to her arm. "How's the wound?" "It's fine. A scratch." "Lucky. Whoever took that shot wasn't aiming to scratch." He studied her face for a moment. "You know who it was, don't you?" Rebecca resumed walking, her pace brisker. "What I know, Deputy Sullivan, is that I came to Georgetown for a quiet life teaching children. What I did not anticipate was becoming the subject of town gossip or interrogation. Not interrogation, concern." He matched her stride easily. "Look, Miss Daniels, I don't know what you're running from, but I'm not running from anything," she interrupted sharply. "Everyone's running from something," Blake replied, his voice suddenly softer, tinged with what sounded like personal understanding. "The question is whether what's chasing you is likely to endanger others." The implication stung. "I would never knowingly bring harm to this town or its children. I believe that. But intentions don't stop bullets." They had reached the edge of town, near the path that led to Rebecca's cabin. She stopped again, turning to face him fully. "What exactly do you want from me, Deputy Sullivan?" "The truth would be a start," he said, "but I'll settle for you letting me help you." "I don't need help." Blake's eyebrows rose slightly. "The bullet graze on your arm suggests otherwise." Rebecca sighed in frustration. "Fine. If I tell you what happened, will you stop this? Whatever this is. If what you tell me is the truth, I'll do whatever I can to help resolve the situation. If it's not—" He shrugged. "I'll probably still help, but it'll be more complicated." Something in his direct gaze made Rebecca believe him. Perhaps it was foolish after years of trusting no one, but she found herself wanting to trust this straightforward cowboy turned deputy. "Someone shot at me from the ridgeline while I was walking in the woods. I took cover, they fired once more, then apparently left. I didn't see who it was." "It was the truth, if not the complete truth." Blake nodded slowly. "And you have no idea who might want to harm you," Rebecca hesitated. "I've made enemies. Who hasn't?" "Most schoolteachers I've known," he replied dryly. "Except maybe Mrs. Pemberton, my third-grade teacher. That woman could hold a grudge." Despite herself, Rebecca smiled. "Perhaps I'm more interesting than most schoolteachers." "I never doubted that for a moment, Miss Daniels." His eyes crinkled at the corners again, and Rebecca found herself noticing how the afternoon sunlight brought out golden highlights in his dark hair. "How about this? I'll keep an eye on your cabin tonight. Make sure nobody takes another shot at you. Tomorrow, we can discuss longer-term arrangements." Alarm flashed through Rebecca. "That's not necessary. I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can. That revolver you nearly introduced me to last night suggests as much. But even the most self-sufficient folks occasionally benefit from having someone watch their backs." Before Rebecca could refuse again, a shout from down the street interrupted them. "Deputy Sullivan, urgent telegram from Denver." A young boy was running toward them, waving a yellow paper. Blake took the telegram, reading it quickly before looking back at Rebecca with a changed expression, more guarded, more official. "Seems we'll have to continue this conversation later," he said, his tone cooler than before. "Good evening, Miss Daniels." As he strode away, Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. Whatever was in that telegram had altered his demeanor completely. Had they found her? Was her true identity about to be exposed? With a growing sense of dread, Rebecca hurried toward her cabin. She would pack essentials tonight, just in case. If need be, she could be gone before dawn, disappearing into the vast wilderness of the Colorado Territory before anyone realized she had fled. She was good at disappearing. It was staying in one place that always proved impossible. Back in her cabin, Rebecca moved with practiced efficiency, gathering the few possessions that mattered: a small leather-bound journal, a silver locket containing a faded photograph, a pouch of emergency funds, and, of course, her revolver and ammunition. These, along with a change of clothes and basic provisions, went into a satchel she could grab at a moment's notice. As darkness fell, she sat by the window, peering occasionally through a gap in the curtains. Despite Deputy Sullivan's words about watching her cabin, she saw no sign of him or anyone else. Perhaps that telegram had changed his plans, or perhaps it had changed his mind about her. The knock, when it finally came around midnight, was so soft Rebecca almost didn't hear it. She approached the door cautiously, revolver in hand. "Miss Daniels," came Blake's hushed voice. "It's Sullivan. We need to talk." Something in his tone made her blood run cold. She unbolted the door and opened it to find Blake standing there, his expression grim in the moonlight. "May I come in?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. Rebecca stepped aside, allowing him to enter before quickly securing the door again. "What's happened?" Blake removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of apparent frustration. "That telegram was from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver. They're sending someone to Georgetown tomorrow, someone looking for a fugitive." Rebecca's hand tightened on her revolver. "What does that have to do with me?" Blake's blue eyes met hers steadily. "The fugitive is a woman wanted for murder in Texas. Killed her husband 5 years ago, then disappeared. There have been sightings across several states since then, but nothing concrete until recently." "And you think this fugitive is me?" Rebecca stated flatly, raising her revolver slightly. To her surprise, Blake made no move toward his own weapon. "I think you're in danger, whether you're her or not, because someone else clearly thinks you are." Rebecca's mind raced. The shooter in the woods, could it have been a bounty hunter? There was a substantial reward for her capture, she knew, though most had given up the hunt years ago. "What do you know about this fugitive?" she asked carefully. "Rebecca Thornton, née Davis. 26 years old. Red hair, green eyes. School teacher before her marriage to rancher James Thornton, who was found shot dead in their home near San Antonio in 1870. Witnesses placed her at the scene, fleeing with blood on her clothes." Rebecca's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. He had almost every detail right, except for her maiden name, which had been Dawson, not Davis. "Sounds like a dangerous woman," she managed to say. "That's the interesting part," Blake continued, setting his hat on the table and leaning against the wall. "I sent some inquiries of my own after joining the sheriff's office here. There are inconsistencies in the case." The main witness was a Texas Ranger named Hollister, who coincidentally was a business partner of the deceased. And the deceased, Thornton, had a reputation for violence, especially toward his wife. Rebecca couldn't breathe. No one had ever mentioned James's violence in the official reports. It had been her word against Hollister's, and Hollister had made sure her word counted for nothing. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. Blake's expression softened slightly. "Because I don't think Rebecca Thornton murdered anyone. I think she defended herself against a brutal husband, then ran because a corrupt lawman was framing her to cover up his own financial schemes with the deceased." Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes, the first she had allowed herself in years. To hear someone else say what she had known all along, it was almost too much to bear. "And if I were this Rebecca Thornton," she said carefully, "what would you do with that information? Help her disappear again, before the marshal's man arrives tomorrow. Get her somewhere safe until the truth can come out." He took a step toward her, his gaze earnest. "There are good people in the marshal's office in Denver who would listen if presented with evidence of corruption. But first, she'd need to trust someone enough to tell her story." Rebecca lowered her revolver slightly, studying his face for any sign of deception. "Why would you risk your position to help a fugitive?" "Because 5 years ago I was a Texas Ranger myself," Blake said quietly. "And I knew Hollister, knew what kind of man he was. I tried to expose him and nearly got killed for my trouble. Left the Rangers with a bullet in my shoulder and a determination to find real justice elsewhere." The revelation stunned Rebecca. Of all the places she could have fled to, all the towns in the vast Western territories, she had chosen one where a former Texas Ranger had also sought refuge. "Is that why you recognized me?" she asked. "Did you know me in Texas?" Blake shook his head. "Never met you. But I investigated some of Hollister's cases after I began suspecting him. Yours was one of them. I saw your wedding portrait in the case file." Rebecca set down her revolver, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets and fear she had carried for so long. "My name was Rebecca Dawson before I married, not Davis. The newspapers got it wrong," Blake nodded. "I figured it might be something like that. Hollister was never one for accurate paperwork." "He was there that night," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out after years of silence. "When my husband attacked me. It wasn't the first time, but it was the worst. He'd lost money in a business venture with Hollister, been drinking heavily. He came at me with a knife." She unconsciously touched a scar at her collarbone, visible above her nightgown. "I got to his revolver first. Shot him once. Hollister arrived just as it happened. He'd come to discuss their failing business. He said no one would believe it was self-defense, that he'd make sure I hanged unless—" "Unless what?" Blake prompted gently when she faltered. "Unless I signed over the ranch to him. Said he'd let me escape if I did. I signed the papers, but I overheard him sending for the sheriff anyway, so I ran." Rebecca's hands trembled as she relived that night. "Been running ever since. Changed my name so many times I sometimes forget who I really am." Blake crossed the small room and, with careful movements as if approaching a wounded animal, took her hands in his. "You're Rebecca, and you're not a murderer. You're a survivor." The simple truth of his words broke something in Rebecca. 5 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of trusting no one at all crashed down around her. She didn't realize she was crying until Blake gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "We need to leave tonight," he said softly. "Pack only what you need. I have horses ready." Rebecca pulled back slightly, suspicion reflexively surfacing. "Why would you risk everything to help me? You don't even know me." Blake's expression turned solemn. "Because I failed once before to stand against corruption, because what happened to you was wrong, and because—" He hesitated, a vulnerability showing in his eyes that seemed out of place on his weathered face. "Because from the moment I saw you watching those children in the schoolyard, something told me you were worth knowing, worth protecting." The sincerity in his voice reached past Rebecca's carefully constructed defenses. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of trusting someone. "Where would we go?" she asked. "I have a friend who owns a ranch near Durango, about 100 miles southwest of here. It's remote, and he owes me his life. We'd be safe there while I gather evidence against Hollister." Rebecca gestured to the satchel by the door. "I'm already packed." Blake's lips curved into a smile. "Of course you are." ready to flee at a moment's notice. It's kept me alive this long. Then let's make sure it keeps you alive a good while longer. He retrieved his hat. Meet me behind the livery stable in 20 minutes. Wear something practical for riding. As he moved toward the door, Rebecca called after him softly. Blake. It was the first time she had used his given name. Thank you. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Don't thank me yet, Miss Daniels. We've got a long, dangerous road ahead of us. But there was something in the way he said it, not with dread, but with a kind of determined optimism that made Rebecca think, perhaps, this journey wouldn't be like all the others she had undertaken alone. Perhaps this time, with this unexpected ally, the road might lead somewhere other than endless flight. 20 minutes later, dressed in her most practical skirt and blouse with her hair secured under a wide-brimmed hat, Rebecca slipped through the shadows toward the livery stable. The town was quiet, most windows dark except for the saloon at the far end of the main street, where piano music and raucous laughter spilled into the night. Blake was waiting as promised, holding the reins of 2 saddled horses. He had exchanged his deputy's badge for plain trail clothes, and loaded saddlebags suggested he had done some hasty packing of his own. Any trouble? He asked as she approached. None. The town's asleep. He helped her secure her satchel to the saddle of a sturdy-looking chestnut mare, then offered a hand to help her mount. Rebecca accepted, noticing the strength in his grip as he boosted her into the saddle. We'll ride south until dawn, then cut west into the mountains, he explained, mounting his own horse, a large black gelding. The main roads will be watched once they realize we're gone, so we'll stick to trails I know from hunting. Rebecca nodded, adjusting her skirt over the saddle. It wasn't ideal for riding, but she had managed with worse. Won't your sudden departure raise suspicions? Left a note saying I'd received word of my ailing mother in Denver and had to leave immediately. Sheriff Miller's a good man, but not the most suspicious by nature. It should buy us some time. With that, they set off, keeping to the shadows as they left Georgetown behind. Once beyond the town limits, they urged the horses to a faster pace, the moonlight illuminating the trail just enough to navigate safely. They rode in silence for the most part, both aware that sound carried far in the night air. Rebecca found herself studying Blake's profile when the moon emerged from behind clouds. There was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring, a quality she had rarely encountered in her years of fleeting connections and false identities. It was near dawn when they finally stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream. The mountains loomed around them, and the first golden light of day was beginning to touch the highest peaks. We'll rest here for an hour, then continue, Blake said, helping Rebecca dismount. Her legs were stiff from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly against him. His hand steadied her at the waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she murmured, stepping back self-consciously. I'm not used to such long rides anymore. You're doing fine. He unsaddled the horses to let them cool properly, then laid out a simple breakfast of jerky, dried apples, and cold biscuits from his saddlebags. It's not much, but we can't risk a fire. Rebecca accepted the food gratefully. I've had worse. They ate in companionable silence, watching the light gradually fill the valley below. Rebecca found herself relaxing despite their precarious situation. There was something about being in Blake's company that eased the constant tension she had lived with for years. May I ask you something? She said after a while. Blake nodded, taking a drink from his canteen before passing it to her. You said you were a Texas Ranger. What happened with Hollister? Why did he try to kill you? Blake's expression darkened slightly. I started noticing patterns in his cases. Too many wealthy widows or widowers, ending up owning nothing after their spouses died mysteriously. Too many convenient witnesses who later couldn't be found. When I began asking questions, suggesting an internal investigation, I suddenly found myself assigned to patrol the most dangerous section of the border alone. He unconsciously rubbed his left shoulder. The ambush wasn't even subtle. 3 men waiting in a canyon I was supposed to ride through. Got me in the shoulder would have finished me if a group of Mexican vaqueros hadn't happened by. And no one believed you were set up. Blake's laugh was bitter. Oh, some did, but Hollister had powerful friends by then. My complaints were dismissed, and I was offered a medical discharge or a transfer to a desk job in Austin. He shrugged. I took the discharge and headed west, figured I could still do some good with a badge, just somewhere Hollister's influence didn't reach. Rebecca studied his face, seeing the echo of old pain and anger there. I'm sorry. Don't be. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here now, wouldn't be able to help you. His eyes met hers, surprisingly warm despite the serious topic. Sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. The sentiment struck Rebecca deeply. All her years of running, of fear and loneliness, had they been leading her to this moment, to this unlikely ally who understood her plight because he had faced a similar injustice. We should move on, Blake said, rising to his feet and offering her a hand up. Still a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. As they readied the horses, Rebecca found herself watching Blake's efficient movements with growing curiosity. He was unlike anyone she had met in her years of running, direct yet gentle, confident yet without arrogance. And despite only knowing her for days, he had risked everything to help her. "Why did you really come to Georgetown?" she asked as they mounted up again. Surely there were safer places for a former Texas Ranger than a remote mining town. Blake adjusted his hat against the rising sun before answering. After what happened with Hollister, I didn't trust easily. Wanted somewhere small where I could know everyone, where corruption would be harder to hide. He glanced at her with a half smile. Also wanted somewhere beautiful. Those mountains had a way of making a man's troubles seem smaller. And now you're leaving all that behind. For me. Rebecca couldn't keep the note of disbelief from her voice. Some things matter more than comfort or safety, Blake replied simply. Justice matters. Truth matters. He urged his horse forward, adding over his shoulder. Besides, Georgetown was starting to feel a bit routine. Nothing like a desperate flight across the Rockies to liven things up. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself smiling as she followed him deeper into the mountains. The journey was arduous, taking them through rugged terrain far from established trails. Blake proved to be an expert guide, navigating the wilderness with confidence born of experience. By nightfall of the second day, Rebecca's muscles ached fiercely, but she refused to complain, determined not to slow their progress. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, and Blake finally deemed it safe enough to risk a small fire. The warmth was welcome against the mountain chill, and Rebecca held her hands out gratefully toward the flames. "Tomorrow we'll reach Miller's Pass," Blake said, returning from tending the horses. "Once we're through it, we'll be in territory where Hollister has no influence. Less chance of bounty hunters, too." "You think the shooter in the woods was a bounty hunter?" Blake nodded, settling beside her. "Most likely. The reward for your capture is substantial, $5,000, last I heard." Rebecca winced. "James's father never did believe I was innocent. He probably put up most of that money himself." "Rich men rarely accept that their sons could be monsters behind closed doors," Blake agreed. He hesitated, then asked gently, "How bad was it?" "With James?" Rebecca stared into the fire, memories she had tried to bury surfacing unwillingly. "It wasn't always bad. When we married, he was charming, attentive. The changes came gradually, a harsh word here, a bruising grip there. By the time I realized the man I married was disappearing, it was too late. She pulled her knees to her chest. The first time he hit me was after a dinner party where he thought I'd smiled too much at his business partner. The last time, the night I shot him. He'd lost heavily in a cattle venture with Hollister, said it was my fault for bringing bad luck into his life. Blake's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists before deliberately relaxing. No one deserves that kind of treatment. No one. That's what my mother always said, Rebecca replied softly. She died when I was 16, but I remember her telling me never to let a man make me feel less than I was. I tried to honor that, but when you're told day after day that you're worthless, that you're damaged goods no man would want if they knew the truth about you, eventually you start to believe it. Your mother was right, Blake said firmly. And James was wrong, about all of it. Rebecca looked at him across the flickering firelight, struck by the conviction in his voice. How can you be so certain? You barely know me. I know enough. His gaze was steady, unwavering. I know you've survived things that would break most people. I know you've maintained your dignity and compassion despite years of being hunted. And I know that, when you thought I was threatening you, you didn't cower, you stood your ground, ready to defend yourself. His words warmed something in Rebecca that had been cold for a very long time. You see a lot. Part of the job. Rangers are trained to observe. His smile softened his features in the firelight. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. Rebecca wanted to insist she could take a turn at watch as well, but exhaustion was rapidly overwhelming her. She nodded, arranging her bedroll near the fire and wrapping herself in the wool blanket Blake had provided. Blake, she said as she settled down, thank you, not just for helping me escape, but for seeing me. The real me. In the flickering light, she thought she saw a flash of something deeper than mere kindness in his eyes. Sleep well, Rebecca, he said quietly. You're safe tonight. And for the first time in 5 years, Rebecca believed it might actually be true. Morning brought a light drizzle that soon turned to a steady rain as they made their way toward Miller's Pass. The mountain trail became slick with mud, forcing them to proceed more cautiously than Blake had planned. Weather's not doing us any favors, he remarked as they paused to rest the horses beneath a stand of pines offering minimal shelter. If this keeps up, the pass might be dangerous. Rebecca pushed wet strands of hair from her face, shivering despite her damp woolen cloak. Is there another way through? Yes, but it would add 2 days to our journey. Blake studied the threatening clouds overhead. Let's continue to the pass and assess the situation when we get there. As they rode, the rain intensified, accompanied by gusting winds that bent the treetops and sent sheets of water into their faces. By midday, they were both soaked through and chilled to the bone. The horses struggled on the increasingly treacherous path, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals on foot. There's an old trapper's cabin near here, Blake shouted over the howling wind. We need to wait out this storm. Rebecca nodded gratefully, too cold to speak. Her hands were numb around the reins, and each step required increasing effort as her sodden skirts clung to her legs. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn logs with a sagging roof and a dirt floor. But it was dry inside, and the stone fireplace appeared intact. It's not much, but it's better than being out in this, Blake said, helping Rebecca inside before returning to shelter the horses in the lean-to attached to the cabin's side. Rebecca stood dripping in the center of the single room, teeth chattering uncontrollably. The cabin was bare except for a crude wooden table, a 3-legged stool, and what appeared to be the remains of a straw mattress in one corner. When Blake returned, He immediately set about building a fire, his movements efficient despite his own shivering. "There's some dry wood stacked behind the fireplace," he explained. "Trapper's code always leaves something for the next traveler." Soon a small fire was crackling in the hearth, its warmth a blessed relief. Blake rummaged in his saddlebags, pulling out a spare shirt and pair of trousers. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, handing them to Rebecca. "I'll step outside while you change." "You're as wet as I am," she protested, "and it's still pouring out there." "I'll check on the horses again." His tone brooked no argument. "You'll catch your death if you stay in those clothes." Once alone, Rebecca peeled off her sodden dress, petticoat, and chemise with difficulty, her fingers still numb and clumsy. Blake's clothes were comically large on her frame, but they were dry and smelled faintly of pine, and leather smelled like him. She realized with an unexpected flutter in her chest. She spread her wet garments near the fire, then wrapped herself in a relatively dry corner of her cloak, sitting as close to the flames as she dared. When Blake knocked a few minutes later, she called for him to enter. He was still dripping wet, water running in rivulets from his hat and coat. "Horses are settled," he reported. "Found some old grain in the lean-to that seems dry enough." "Now it's your turn," Rebecca said firmly. "You need dry clothes too." Blake hesitated, then nodded, reaching for his saddlebag again. With the same consideration he had shown her, Rebecca turned her back while he changed, focusing intently on the dancing flames. "Decent now," he said after a few minutes. When she turned, he was in dry clothes but still shivering, his dark hair plastered to his head. Without thinking, Rebecca grabbed the remaining dry corner of her cloak and gestured him closer to the fire. "Come here. We can share the cloak." He hesitated only briefly before settling beside her, allowing her to spread the woolen garment around his shoulders as well. Their proximity was intimate by necessity, shoulders and thighs touching as they huddled for warmth. "Storm's getting worse," Blake observed, his voice low in the small space between them. Outside, the wind howled with increasing ferocity, rattling the cabin's single window. "Will it delay our pursuers as well?" Rebecca asked. "Most likely. No sensible man would be out in this weather." A smile touched his lips. "Present company excluded, of course." "Does that make us brave or foolish?" "Both, probably." His shoulder pressed more firmly against hers as he leaned forward to add another log to the fire. "Though in your case, I'd say brave. Definitely brave." The warmth in his voice matched the growing warmth of the cabin, and Rebecca found herself relaxing against him almost unconsciously. 5 years of constant vigilance and isolation had left her unaccustomed to human contact. Yet with Blake, it felt natural, comforting. As the day waned and the storm showed no signs of abating, they shared a meager meal of the last of their provisions. The intimacy of the small cabin, cut off from the world by the raging elements, created a strange bubble of tranquility despite their circumstances. "Tell me about your life before," Blake said as darkness fell outside. "Before James Thornton, who was Rebecca Dawson?" The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her real past, not the fabricated histories she created for each new identity. She was hopeful, Rebecca said slowly. Naive, perhaps. Raised by a schoolteacher mother and a father who ran the general store in a small town outside of San Antonio, I wanted to be a teacher like my mother. I was, for a short while before I met James. A smile touched her lips at the memory. I loved it watching children discover the world through books, seeing their faces light up when they mastered something difficult. Is that why you took the teaching position in Georgetown? To reclaim something from your past? Rebecca nodded. It was the one part of my old life I thought might be safe to revisit. Different name, different state, but the same joy in teaching. She glanced at him curiously. What about you? Was being a lawman always your ambition? Blake poked at the fire thoughtfully. Not always. My father was a rancher in East Texas. Expected me to take over the family spread someday. But then the war came. His expression grew distant. Served in the Confederate cavalry, saw things no man should see. When I came home, the ranch was struggling and I couldn't settle back into that life. Needed something with purpose, something where I could make a difference. He shrugged. The Rangers seemed like the answer at the time. Do you regret it, becoming a ranger? No, he said after a moment's reflection. Despite how it ended, I did some good, helped people who needed helping. Can't regret that. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows against the cabin walls. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming on the roof and wind whistling through the chinks in the logs. We should try to get some sleep, Blake suggested eventually. No telling when this storm will break. The practical matter of sleeping arrangements in the tiny cabin hung between them unspoken. There was only the floor, the remnants of the straw mattress insufficient for one person, let alone two. I can sleep sitting up against the wall, Blake offered. You take the space near the fire. Don't be ridiculous, Rebecca countered. You're exhausted too, we can. Share the space, if you're comfortable with that. Blake studied her face in the firelight, seeming to search for any sign of hesitation or fear. Are you sure? After everything you've been through, I wouldn't want to. I trust you, Rebecca interrupted, surprising herself with the simple truth of it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Something shifted in Blake's expression, a softening, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. All right then. They arranged their bedrolls side by side near the hearth, close enough to share warmth but with a respectful space between them. As they settled down, Rebecca found herself acutely aware of Blake's presence, the sound of his breathing, the slight creak of the floorboards when he moved. Rebecca, he said softly in the darkness, no matter what happens tomorrow or the days after, I want you to know something. She turned her head toward his voice. What's that? You deserve a life without fear, a chance to be that hopeful woman again. And I intend to do everything in my power to make that possible. Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. Why? Why risk so much for someone you barely know? In the dim light from the dying fire, she could just make out his profile as he turned toward her. Because some things in this world are worth fighting for. Justice is one. But a woman like you, brave, resilient, kind despite everything that's happened to her, that's something even more worth fighting for. His words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple dignity he afforded her after years of being treated as nothing more than prey. Thank you, she whispered, unable to articulate the depths of her gratitude. Blake's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in a gesture both protective and tender. Get some sleep. I'll be right here. With his hand warm in hers, Rebecca closed her eyes, listening to the storm rage outside while finding, for the first time in years, a perfect stillness within. Morning brought cleared skies and a transformed landscape. Overnight, the rain had given way to snow at their elevation, coating the surrounding forest in a pristine blanket of white. Rebecca awoke to find herself curled against Blake's side, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. She lay still for a moment, savoring the unfamiliar sense of security before gently extracting herself. Blake stirred at her movement. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. Storm pass seems to have, but it left snow behind. Rebecca moved to the window, her breath fogging the crude glass. It's beautiful. Blake joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Beautiful, but it complicates things. Snow means tracks hours will be easy to follow. Can we still cross the pass? He considered, rubbing the stubble on his jaw thoughtfully. We'll try. The snow doesn't look too deep yet. If we move quickly, we might make it through before any pursuers realize which direction we've taken. They prepared to leave, Rebecca changing back into her now dry clothes while Blake checked on the horses. Her spirits were lighter than they had been in days, despite the new challenges posed by the snow. There was something about having an ally after years of solitude that bolstered her courage. As they set out, the morning sun glinted off the snow-covered landscape, nearly blinding in its brilliance. Their horses moved carefully on the slippery trail, breath steaming in the cold air. Rebecca's cheeks stung with cold, but the discomfort was minor compared to the beauty surrounding them. Miller's Pass should be just beyond that ridge, Blake said after they'd been traveling for about 2 hours. Once we're through, it's a relatively straight path down to, he stopped abruptly, raising a hand for silence. Rebecca tensed immediately, years of running having honed her instincts for danger. What is it? She whispered. Horses, more than one, coming up from the south. Blake's expression was grim as he guided his mount to the shelter of some pines. Rebecca followed suit, heart pounding. They waited in tense silence. Soon the distinct sound of hoofbeats crunching through snow became audible, growing steadily louder. Blake slowly drew his revolver, positioning himself slightly ahead of Rebecca in a protective stance. 3 riders appeared around a bend in the trail below them. Even from a distance, Rebecca could tell these weren't ordinary travelers. They rode with purpose, rifles visible in saddle scabbards, scanning the landscape with practiced vigilance. Bounty hunters, Blake murmured. Professional ones by the look of them. Rebecca's blood ran cold. How did they find us so quickly? They probably split up to cover different escape routes from Georgetown. These 3 drew the mountain trails. Blake's jaw tightened as he watched the riders approach the spot where their own tracks crossed the main trail. They'll see our tracks any moment now. As if on cue, the lead rider raised a hand, bringing the group to a halt. He dismounted, crouching to examine the snow. Even from their hidden vantage point, Rebecca could see the moment he identified fresh hoofprints heading toward the pass. They know, she whispered. Blake nodded grimly. We need to move. Now. While they're still figuring out how fresh the tracks are. They backed their horses carefully through the trees, moving parallel to the trail but remaining under cover until they were out of earshot of the bounty hunters. Then they urged their mounts forward, abandoning stealth for speed. We'll make for the pass, Blake said as they rode. It narrows significantly at the top, a good defensive position if it comes to that. Rebecca didn't miss the implication. If it comes to that. A confrontation was becoming increasingly likely, and she knew all too well what would happen if the bounty hunters caught up to them. Dead or alive, the reward for her capture would be the same. They pushed the horses hard, but the snow-covered terrain slowed their progress. Behind them, they occasionally caught glimpses of their pursuers, who had abandoned subtlety in favor of speed as well. Miller's Pass loomed ahead, a narrow gap between 2 towering cliffs. As they approached, Blake suddenly veered off the main trail, guiding his horse up a steeper, less obvious path. This way, he called back to Rebecca. It's rougher but leads to a higher entrance to the pass. We can get above them. The trail was treacherous, barely more than a game path winding up the steep slope. Rebecca leaned forward in the saddle, murmuring encouragement to her struggling mare. The snow was deeper here, undisturbed by previous travelers, making each step uncertain. They reached a narrow ledge that skirted the side of the cliff, offering a view of the main trail below. The bounty hunters had reached the base of the pass and were proceeding cautiously, clearly aware they were closing in on their quarry. "Here," Blake said, guiding his horse into a recessed area where the cliff face created a natural shelter. "We'll leave the horses and proceed on foot. There's a path along the top of the pass that they won't expect." Rebecca dismounted, legs stiff from cold and exertion. "What's your plan?" Blake secured the horses, ensuring they were hidden from view before retrieving extra ammunition from his saddlebags. "Get you across the pass and down the other side while creating enough of a distraction that they won't follow immediately." A distraction. Rebecca's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're going to engage them, just long enough for you to get clear." He checked his revolver methodically. "The path along the top is narrow but passable. Follow it until you reach a large boulder shaped like a bear's head. From there, you'll see a trail leading down the western side." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you to face 3 armed men alone." Blake looked up from his preparations, surprise evident in his expression. "Rebecca, this isn't open for debate. You need to know." She stood her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "5 years I've been running alone, making every decision based solely on survival. I'm done with that. I'm not abandoning you to save myself." "This isn't abandonment, it's strategy," Blake argued, though she could see a flicker of something like admiration in his eyes. "If both of us are captured or killed, everything we've done has been for nothing. And if you die covering my escape, how am I supposed to live with that?" Rebecca countered. "Besides, I'm a decent shot. 2 guns are better than 1. They stared at each other in tense silence, the distant sounds of the approaching bounty hunters lending urgency to their standoff. Finally, Blake's expression softened. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "Survival requires stubbornness," she replied simply. Blake nodded, accepting her decision. "All right then. New plan. We find a defensible position and try to reason with them first. If that fails..." He left the implication hanging. "If that fails, we do what we must," Rebecca finished for him. Together they made their way along the narrow path that skirted the top of the pass, moving carefully on the snow-covered rock. Below, they could see the bounty hunters proceeding through the narrowest part of the pass, weapons drawn as they followed the tracks Blake and Rebecca's horses had left before diverting upward. Blake pointed to a natural stone outcropping that provided both cover and a clear view of the pass below. They positioned themselves behind it, guns ready but not yet aimed. "Let me try talking to them first," Blake said quietly. "Some bounty hunters can be reasoned with, especially if they understand the full story." Rebecca nodded, though doubt clouded her mind. Men motivated by a $5,000 reward rarely cared about the complexities of justice. When the hunters were directly below their position, Blake stood, keeping partial cover behind the rock. "That's far enough, gentlemen," he called down, his voice echoing off the cliff walls. The 3 men immediately scattered for cover, weapons raised. "Who's that up there?" called the leader, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek. "Deputy Blake Sullivan, formerly of the Texas Rangers. I'm going to ask you to lower your weapons and hear me out." There was a moment of confused silence below. Then the scarred man laughed harshly. "Sullivan, well, ain't this interesting? Word is you've gone rogue, deputy, aiding and abetting a fugitive." "I'm aiding an innocent woman wrongfully accused," Blake replied evenly. Rebecca Thornton acted in self-defense against an abusive husband. The witness against her, Ranger Hollister, was corrupt and stood to gain financially from her conviction. "Don't much care about the details," the bounty hunter called back. $5,000 says she comes with us," dead or alive. Your choice which? Rebecca's heart sank. As she had feared, justice meant nothing compared to the reward. She exchanged a glance with Blake, who gave a slight nod, confirming what they both now knew: negotiation had failed. "I can't let you take her," Blake said, his voice hardening. "Turn around and ride away, and we all live to see another day." The only response was a rifle shot that splintered the rock near Blake's head. He ducked down immediately, sharing a grim look with Rebecca. "So much for reasoning with them," she said, checking her revolver one last time. What followed was a tense exchange of gunfire, with Blake and Rebecca using their elevated position to good advantage. The bounty hunters were pinned down in the pass, with limited cover available. One of the hunters took a bullet to the leg from Blake's precise aim, his cries of pain echoing off the cliff walls. But their advantage wouldn't last forever. The bounty hunters began coordinating their movements, one providing covering fire while the others attempted to work their way up the slope toward Blake and Rebecca's position. "We need to move," Blake said urgently as bullets struck increasingly close to their hiding spot. "They're flanking us." They retreated along the narrow path, searching for another defensible position. The gunfire continued sporadically, the hunters unable to get clear shots but unwilling to abandon their pursuit. As they rounded a bend in the path, Rebecca suddenly stumbled, a cry of pain escaping her as she fell to one knee. Blake was at her side instantly, supporting her weight. "I'm hit," she gasped, clutching her side where a growing red stain spread across her coat. "Must have caught a ricochet." Blake's face paled as he helped her behind a large boulder, shielded from the hunter's view. He quickly examined the wound, his hands gentle but urgent. "It's not too deep," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Bullet grazed your side, but it's bleeding heavily. We need to bind it." Rebecca nodded, fighting against the waves of pain. "Do it quickly. They'll be on us soon." Blake tore a strip from his shirt, binding the wound as best he could while keeping watch for their pursuers. "Can you still move?" he asked, helping her to her feet. Rebecca nodded grimly, teeth clenched against the pain. "I've endured worse." The look Blake gave her then was complex admiration mixed with something deeper, more personal. "Just a little farther," he promised. "There's a place ahead where the path splits. One fork leads to a dead end. If we can lure them that way." They moved as quickly as Rebecca's injury would allow, the sounds of pursuit growing closer behind them. The path split as Blake had described, and they took the right fork, which curved back toward the western side of the pass. "Wait," Rebecca said suddenly, an idea forming. "If they think we took the dead end," Blake caught her meaning immediately, "we could double back behind them." A smile of approval crossed his face. Quick thinking. They found a sheltered spot where they could watch both paths. Soon, two of the bounty hunters appeared, moving cautiously along the trail. After a brief consultation, they took the left fork, the dead end Blake had mentioned. "Now's our chance," Blake whispered. "The third man must be either guarding the horses or too injured to continue. We can circle back to our mounts and be gone before they realize their mistake." They moved swiftly but carefully, Rebecca fighting through the pain of her wound. As they neared the spot where they'd left their horses, a voice called out from behind them. "That's far enough." They turned to find the scarred leader of the bounty hunters standing there, rifle aimed steadily at them. Blood stained his left arm, but his grip on the weapon was unwavering. "You're cleverer than most," he acknowledged with a grim smile, "but not clever enough." Blake shifted subtly, positioning himself partially in front of Rebecca. "It's over, friend. Your companions are heading down a dead-end trail and you're wounded. Let us pass and we'll all walk away from this." The bounty hunter's smile widened unpleasantly. $5,000 buys a lot of medical attention. Now drop your weapons, both of you." Rebecca felt Blake tense beside her, knew he was calculating the odds, preparing to make a move that would likely get him killed, but might give her a chance to escape. The realization struck her like physical blow. He was willing to die for her. In that moment, something shifted within Rebecca. 5 years of running, of trusting no one, of believing herself unworthy of genuine connection. Because of what James had done to her, it all crystallized into a perfect clarity. This man beside her, who had known her only days, valued her life above his own. Not because she was fragile or needed protection, but because he saw in her something worth protecting: her dignity, her right to justice, her future. Without conscious thought, Rebecca's hand found Blake's, squeezing once in silent communication. She saw his eyes widen slightly, felt the answering pressure of his fingers against hers. "I said drop your weapons," the bounty hunter barked, taking a step closer. "You know what I've been wondering," Blake said conversationally, still holding Rebecca's hand. "How you found us so quickly. Almost as if you knew exactly where to look." The man's expression flickered briefly. "Good tracking, now enough talking." "No, it was more than that," Blake continued. "Someone told you which way we'd go, someone who knew these mountains, someone like Sheriff Miller." A cruel smile crossed the bounty hunter's face. "Smart man. The sheriff sends his regards, said you were a fool to trust him with your plans. Now for the last time, drop your weapons," or the crack of a rifle shot interrupted him. The bounty hunter's eyes widened in shock as he crumpled to the ground, revealing behind him an elderly man with a smoking rifle. "Damned bounty hunters," the old man spat, lowering his weapon. "Been watching you folks since you took shelter in my cabin. Figured you might need a hand." Rebecca and Blake stared in stunned silence at their unexpected savior, a grizzled mountain man with a long gray beard and weathered features. "You," Blake began, "that was your cabin." "Been mine for 30 years, the old man confirmed, approaching cautiously to check that the bounty hunter was truly dead. "Name's Josiah Wilson. Heard enough of your conversation last night to know you're running from an injustice, not justice itself." He glanced up at them with shrewd eyes. "Also heard enough to know you're good folks in a bad situation." Relief washed over Rebecca in a dizzying wave, the pain of her wound suddenly more acute as the immediate danger passed. She swayed slightly, and Blake's arm immediately went around her waist, supporting her. "She's wounded," he told Josiah urgently. "Bullet grazed, but she's losing blood." The old man nodded. "My cabin's closer than wherever you were heading, and safer now that those other two are on a wild goose chase." He gestured to the dead bounty hunter. "We'll have to do something about him, though. Can't leave bodies lying around, even in these mountains." As Josiah and Blake discussed what to do with the body, Rebecca found herself leaning more heavily against Blake, the events of the past days catching up to her in a rush of exhaustion and pain. His arm tightened around her, and he looked down with concern evident in his blue eyes. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Just a little longer and we'll get you somewhere safe to rest." Rebecca managed a weak smile. "I'm not going anywhere," she assured him, realizing as she said it that she meant it in more ways than one. For the first time in 5 years, running no longer seemed like the only option. Back at Josiah's cabin, the old man proved to be surprisingly skilled at tending wounds. "Spent some time as an army surgeon during the Mexican War," he explained as he carefully cleaned and stitched Rebecca's injury. "Not much call for it up here, but some skills you never forget." Rebecca sat stoically through the procedure, grateful for the whiskey Josiah had provided to dull the pain. Blake remained by her side, his presence a steady comfort. "You two are welcome to stay until the lady's well enough to travel." Josiah offered as he finished bandaging Rebecca's side. Those other bounty hunters will figure out they've been fooled eventually, but they won't know where to look, and nobody bothers old Josiah up here. We're grateful, Blake said, genuine warmth in his voice. But we can't impose on your hospitality for long. Our presence puts you at risk. Josiah waved away his concern. Been alone too long anyway. Bit of company wouldn't hurt. He eyed them both thoughtfully. Besides, sounds like you folks have an interesting story. Been a while since I heard a good tale. Over the next 3 days, Rebecca regained her strength while Blake and Josiah took turns keeping watch for any sign of the remaining bounty hunters. They shared their story with the old mountain man, who listened with undisguised interest, occasionally offering insights from his own experiences with frontier justice. This Ranger Hollister sounds like a real piece of work, Josiah commented on the evening of their 3rd day. Known men like him before. Power and greed make a nasty combination. The worst part is, he's still out there, Blake said grimly. Still wearing a badge, still perverting justice. Rebecca, seated near the fire with a blanket around her shoulders, studied Blake's face in the flickering light. The depth of his anger at Hollister's corruption matched her own, she realized. This wasn't just about helping her, it was about righting a fundamental wrong that offended everything he believed in. "What will you do?" she asked softly. "After you get me somewhere safe?" Blake looked up, meeting her gaze. "Gather evidence. Make a case that can't be ignored or buried. Then take it to someone with the authority to do something about it." His expression softened. "But first, I'm making sure you're truly safe." "My friend's ranch near Durango is still our best option," he continued. "Josiah says the pass should be clear enough to travel in another day or 2. Once you're settled there, I can—" Rebecca interrupted quietly. "What? We can gather evidence. We can build a case." She straightened, ignoring the twinge from her healing wound. "This is my fight too, Blake. Perhaps more mine than yours." Josiah chuckled softly, drawing their attention. "Been watching you too," he said with the candor of the elderly. "Reminds me of me and my Martha, God rest her soul. Stubborn as mules, both of you, but stronger together than apart." Rebecca felt warmth creep into her cheeks, but she didn't look away from Blake's intense gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of what had been growing since their first meeting, a connection that transcended their shared purpose. "Together then," Blake agreed, a smile softening his features. "Assuming you're well enough to travel soon." "I'm tougher than I look," Rebecca reminded him. "That you are," he acknowledged. Never doubted it for a moment. The journey to Durango took longer than anticipated, with Rebecca's injury necessitating frequent rest stops. But the delay proved fortunate, as it gave the remaining bounty hunters time to abandon their search and return to more promising hunting grounds. Blake's friend, Michael Carter, owned a sprawling cattle ranch 20 miles outside Durango. When they arrived, dusty and travel-worn, Michael welcomed them with the boisterous enthusiasm of a man who had few visitors. "Blake Sullivan, you old devil," he exclaimed, embracing Blake heartily before turning to Rebecca with a courteous bow. "And this must be the lady you mentioned in your message. Welcome to Carter Ranch, Miss Thornton." The use of her real name startled Rebecca, and she cast a questioning glance at Blake. "I sent a rider ahead while you were recovering at Josiah's," he explained. "Thought it best Michael know the full situation before we arrived." Michael's ranch house was surprisingly elegant for a frontier operation, with actual glass windows and furnishings that wouldn't have looked out of place in an Eastern home. "My wife's influence," he explained when he noticed Rebecca's admiring glance. "God rest her soul. She insisted on bringing civilization to the wilderness." Over dinner, Michael listened intently as Blake filled in the details of their journey from Georgetown. When the story was complete, he leaned back thoughtfully. "So you aim to clear Miss Thornton's name and expose this corrupt Ranger Hollister," he summarized. "Ambitious, but not impossible. I have some contacts in the territorial government who might be persuaded to listen." "We need evidence first," Blake said. "Witnesses, documentation of Hollister's financial dealings with James Thornton, anything that supports Rebecca's account of that night." "And how do you propose to gather this evidence while half the bounty hunters in the territory are looking for both of you?" Michael asked practically. Blake smiled slightly. "That's where things get interesting." He glanced at Rebecca, including her in the conversation. "We need to spread word that Rebecca Thornton has fled to California or Oregon. Meanwhile, we work quietly, contacting potential witnesses, building our case." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And where would I be while this word is spreading?" "Here," Blake said simply. "If you're willing. Michael's ranch is remote enough to be safe, and few people know of our connection." "You'd be welcome," Michael assured her. "I have plenty of space, and my foreman's wife would appreciate female companionship." Rebecca considered the offer. The prospect of staying in one place, even temporarily, was both appealing and terrifying after years of constant movement. "And you?" she asked Blake. "Where would you be during all this?" A shadow crossed his face. "I'd need to travel. San Antonio primarily, to start gathering testimonies and documents." The thought of Blake returning to Texas, possibly crossing paths with Hollister, sent a chill through Rebecca. "It's too dangerous," she protested. "Hollister still has influence there if he learns you're asking questions." "I know how to be discreet," Blake assured her, "and I have former colleagues who share my opinions of Hollister. They'll help." Rebecca wasn't convinced, but she recognized the determination in his expression. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about addressing a corruption that had been festering for years. "How long?" she asked finally. "A few weeks. A month at most." Blake's gaze was steady, honest. "I'll be careful, Rebecca. And I'll come back." The promise hung between them, weighted with meaning that extended beyond the immediate mission. Rebecca realized with sudden clarity that she wanted him to come back for reasons that had nothing to do with clearing her name. That night, unable to sleep in the comfortable guest room Michael had provided, Rebecca stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. The stars stretched endlessly above, more brilliant here than she had ever seen them. Soft footsteps alerted her to Blake's presence before he spoke. "Couldn't sleep either," she shook her head, not turning from her contemplation of the stars. "Too much to think about." He moved to stand beside her, his arm just brushing against hers. The casual contact sent a warmth through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the mild spring night. "Are you sure about this plan?" she asked softly. "There must be another way to gather evidence without you risking yourself in Texas." "It's the fastest way," Blake replied, "and time matters. The longer Hollister remains in power, the more people suffer from his corruption." Rebecca turned to look at him then, studying his profile in the moonlight. "You're a good man, Blake Sullivan, better than most." He glanced down at her, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "I don't know about that, just trying to do what's right." "That's exactly what makes you good." She hesitated, then continued more softly. "I worry about what might happen to you in Texas." Blake's expression softened. "I've survived worse odds." "That's not particularly reassuring," he chuckled, the sound warm in the quiet night. "Would it help if I promised to write, let you know I'm safe?" "It might," she admitted. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders touching, gazing out at the starlit landscape. Rebecca was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, reassuring, yet stirring emotions she had thought long buried. "Rebecca," Blake said finally, his voice low, "There's something I need to say before I leave." She turned to face him fully, heart quickening at the intensity in his eyes. "These past weeks," he continued, "traveling together, facing dangers together. It's shown me something I wasn't expecting to find." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, more than as someone I'm trying to help, more than I should, perhaps, given our circumstances." Rebecca's breath caught. Part of her had known this was coming, had felt the same connection growing between them. Yet another part, the damaged, frightened part that James had created, whispered that she was unworthy, incapable of being truly loved. "Blake, she began, uncertain how to continue. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I understand if you don't feel the same or if it's too soon after everything you've been through. I just wanted you to know before I left." "It's not that," Rebecca said, finding her voice. "It's just, James told me so often that I was damaged, unlovable. Sometimes I still believe it." Blake's expression darkened briefly at the mention of her late husband, then softened again with understanding. James was wrong about everything. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the strongest, most resilient person I've ever met, and any man would be fortunate to earn your affection." Rebecca leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "You already have," she admitted quietly. "My affection, perhaps more than that." The smile that illuminated Blake's face then was like sunrise after the longest night. "Then I have even more reason to return quickly and safely." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to establish a boundary. Instead, Rebecca closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after years of wandering. When they finally parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle at her waist. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "Whatever it takes." "See that you do, Deputy Sullivan," Rebecca replied, a smile in her voice despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "I've only just found you. I'm not ready to let you go." Blake departed 2 days later, riding eastward with a small group of Michael's ranch hands who were traveling to purchase new breeding stock. The separation was harder than Rebecca had anticipated, a physical ache that surprised her with its intensity. To distract herself, she threw herself into life at the ranch, helping Michael's foreman's wife, Ellen, with household tasks and even assisting the ranch's part-time schoolteacher with lessons for the workers' children. The familiar rhythm of teaching brought her unexpected joy, a reconnection with the woman she had been before James Thornton entered her life. True to his word, Blake wrote regularly, his letters arriving via Michael's private courier to ensure they wouldn't be traced. His early correspondence detailed his careful investigative work in San Antonio, where he had reconnected with a former ranger colleague named Thomas, who shared his suspicions about Hollister. "Thomas has been keeping a record of Hollister's activities for years," Blake wrote. "Property acquisitions that coincided with mysterious deaths, businesses that changed hands after their owners faced trumped-up charges. Your case fits a pattern, Rebecca. We're not alone in wanting justice." As weeks passed, his letters began to include more personal sentiments alongside the progress reports. Memories of their journey together, thoughts about the future, simple expressions of longing that made Rebecca's heart beat faster when she read them in the privacy of her room. "I find myself thinking of you at the most unexpected moments," one letter read. "The sight of a schoolhouse reminds me of how you looked teaching your students in Georgetown. A flash of red hair in a crowd makes me turn, hoping against reason that it might be you. Even the stars at night seem to hold your image." Rebecca kept his letters bundled with ribbon in a drawer beside her bed, rereading them often. In her replies, she gradually opened up about her own feelings, allowing herself to express emotions she had suppressed for years. "I never expected to feel this way again," she wrote. "After James, I believed myself incapable of trusting, of loving. You have shown me how wrong I was. Whatever comes of our quest for justice, know that you have already given me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever." 4 weeks into Blake's absence, a telegram arrived for Michael. Rebecca watched with growing alarm as his expression darkened while reading it. "What is it?" she asked when he looked up. "Is it Blake? Is he hurt?" Michael hesitated, then handed her the telegram. "It's from my contact in Denver. There's a rumor that Hollister himself is heading west, possibly to Colorado territory." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "He knows. Somehow he knows Blake is investigating him." "It seems likely," Michael agreed grimly. "The telegram mentions he's traveling with several other rangers and deputized men. This isn't a social visit. We have to warn Blake," Rebecca said urgently. "If Hollister reaches San Antonio before Blake leaves, I've already sent a rider with a warning," Michael assured her. "Blake will get word in time." But as days passed with no response from Blake, Rebecca's worry grew to near panic. Her nights were restless, filled with nightmares of Blake facing Hollister, of gunshots echoing across Texas plains. Then, nearly a week after the warning was sent, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at a breakneck pace. Rebecca, who had taken to watching the eastern road whenever her duties allowed, spotted him first. "Michael," she called, heart pounding with hope and fear. "Someone's coming." They gathered on the porch, Michael with rifle in hand as a precaution. As the rider drew closer, Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Even at a distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse. "It's Blake," she whispered, already moving toward the hitching post as the rider approached. Blake dismounted in a fluid motion, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Rebecca rushing toward him. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms, holding her tightly as if reassuring himself she was real. "You're safe," she breathed against his chest, inhaling his familiar scent of leather and pine. "I was so worried." "I got Michael's warning just in time," Blake said, drawing back slightly to look at her. There was a new scar along his jawline that hadn't been there when he left, and his eyes held a weariness that spoke of hard travel. "Had to take some back trails to avoid Hollister's men. Sorry it took so long to get back." Michael joined them, clapping Blake on the shoulder in welcome. "You made it, that's what matters. Come inside, you look like you could use a meal and a drink, not necessarily in that order." Over whiskey and Ellen's hearty stew, Blake recounted his journey. He had gathered significant evidence against Hollister financial records, showing his stake in James Thornton's business ventures. Testimonies from witnesses who had seen James's abuse of Rebecca. Even a deathbed confession from a former deputy who admitted to helping falsify evidence in several of Hollister's cases. "It's enough to bring to the territorial governor," Blake concluded, "especially with Thomas's additional documentation. But with Hollister heading this way, we need to move quickly." "Why would he come himself?" Rebecca wondered. "Why not just send more bounty hunters?" "Because this isn't just about you anymore," Blake explained. "My questions stirred up too many old cases, too many ghosts. He knows his entire operation is at risk of exposure." Michael leaned forward, expression grim. "How much time do we have?" "Not much. I've been tracking Hollister's movements through telegraph operators along the route. He was in Santa Fe 3 days ago, which means he could reach Durango within a week." Rebecca's mind raced. "Then we need to get to the governor before Hollister gets to us. Where is he?" "Denver," Blake nodded. 4 days hard ride from here. But it's not that simple, Rebecca. You're still a wanted fugitive. Walking into the governor's mansion isn't an option. So we send the evidence with someone else, Michael suggested. I could go. Hollister would recognize your connection to me, Blake countered. He's thorough. No, it has to be someone above suspicion, someone with enough authority that the governor will take the meeting. A heavy silence fell over the table as they contemplated their limited options. Finally, Rebecca spoke, a plan forming in her mind. Judge Wilson, she said. The circuit judge. Ellen mentioned he's staying in Durango this week for the quarterly court sessions. Blake's eyes lit up with understanding. Perfect. Wilson has a reputation for integrity. If we can convince him to review the evidence and take it to the governor himself. I know his clerk, Michael added. Could arrange a private meeting away from prying eyes. As the men discussed logistics, Rebecca felt a strange calm settling over her. After 5 years of living in fear, they were finally taking the fight to Hollister. Whatever happened next, she would face it standing her ground, not fleeing into the night. Later, when Michael had retired and they were alone in the parlor, Blake drew Rebecca into his arms again. I missed you, he said softly against her hair. More than I can say. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. I was afraid you wouldn't come back, she admitted. That Hollister would find you before you could escape. I made you a promise, Blake reminded her, tilting her face up to his. And I intend to keep all my promises to you, Rebecca Thornton. The kiss they shared then was deeper, more urgent than the one they'd exchanged before his departure. Rebecca felt herself responding with a passion she had thought long extinguished, her body awakening to sensations almost forgotten. When they finally parted, breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said, when your name is cleared and you're truly free, I want to ask you something. But not yet. Not until you can answer without the shadow of the past hanging over us. Rebecca knew what he meant, could see it in his eyes, a future together, a life shared. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. And if the answer is yes, she whispered. What then? Blake's smile was tender, his eyes reflecting the same hope and fear she felt. Then we build something new, together. The meeting with Judge Wilson was arranged for the following evening in the private dining room of Durango's finest hotel. Michael's connection with the clerk proved invaluable, securing them an hour of the judge's time without raising suspicions. Rebecca remained at the ranch while Blake and Michael rode into town with the precious documentation. Though she had argued to accompany them, Blake had been firm. If anything goes wrong, if Hollister has men watching the town, you need to be somewhere safe, he had insisted. Besides, the judge doesn't need to meet you yet. The evidence should speak for itself first. So she waited, alternating between pacing the porch and helping Ellen prepare dinner, her mind constantly returning to Blake and Michael in town. Would the judge believe them? Would he agree to take their case to the governor? Or would he dismiss them, perhaps even alert the authorities to Blake's connection with a fugitive? The sound of approaching horses at dusk sent her rushing to the porch, heart in her throat. Blake and Michael rode in at a leisurely pace, their relaxed postures immediately easing her worst fears. Well, she demanded as soon as they dismounted. The men exchanged glances and then Blake broke into a broad smile. He believed us, completely. Wilson already had suspicions about Hollister from other cases that had crossed his bench. Our evidence confirmed what he'd suspected for years. He's leaving for Denver tomorrow, Michael added, taking everything directly to the governor. And he's bringing a federal marshal with him for good measure. Relief flooded through Rebecca, making her knees weak. Blake was at her side instantly, supporting her with an arm around her waist. It's really happening, she said, looking up at him with wonder. After all this time. It's not over yet, Blake cautioned. But yes, it's happening. Wilson believes the governor will issue an order for Hollister's arrest by week's end. And me, Rebecca asked quietly, what about the charges against me? Wilson is recommending a full pardon based on the evidence of self-defense and Hollister's corruption. He seemed confident it would be granted. The possibility of freedom, true freedom, not just temporary escape, was almost too much to comprehend. Rebecca had lived so long with the weight of her past that she scarcely knew how to imagine life without it. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Rebecca found herself once again on the porch, gazing at the stars. The future stretched before her, suddenly vast with possibility where before there had been only the narrow path of survival. Blake joined her, as he had that night before his departure. Without words, he draped a blanket around her shoulders, his hand lingering warmly on her back. "What will you do?" Rebecca asked after a comfortable silence. "When this is over, will you return to being a deputy?" Blake considered the question. "I don't think so. I've worn a badge long enough to know its limitations. Justice is more than law enforcement." "Then what?" He smiled slightly. "I've been thinking about ranching, actually. Michael's been trying to convince me to buy the property adjoining his for years. Says it's good grazing land going to waste." The image of Blake as a rancher came easily to Rebecca's mind, his natural affinity with horses, his practical knowledge of the land. "I think you'd be good at it," she said honestly. "Perhaps." His gaze shifted from the horizon to her face. "But a ranch needs more than just a rancher to truly thrive. It needs a home at its heart." The implication was clear, and Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Are you asking me something, Blake Sullivan?" "Not yet," he reminded her gently. "Not until you're truly free, but I'm hoping, Rebecca. Hoping that when I do ask, your answer might be yes." Rebecca turned to face him fully, finding in his eyes the same longing she felt in her own heart. "When you do ask," she said softly, "I think you'll find I've already answered." The days that followed were tense with anticipation as they waited for news from Denver. Blake insisted on maintaining vigilance, posting ranch hands as lookouts and keeping horses saddled and ready in case Hollister appeared before the governor's orders could reach local law enforcement. A week after Judge Wilson's departure for Denver, Michael's courier returned with a sealed letter. They gathered in the parlor as Michael broke the seal and scanned the contents, his expression giving nothing away until he looked up with a broad smile. "It's done," he announced. "The governor has issued an arrest warrant for Hollister and 6 of his associates on charges of corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Federal marshals were dispatched yesterday to intercept him before he reaches Durango." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes as Michael continued. "And there's more. Based on Judge Wilson's recommendation and the evidence presented, the governor has issued a full pardon for Rebecca Thornton, citing clear evidence of self-defense and subsequent miscarriage of justice." Blake, seated beside Rebecca on the sofa, took her trembling hand in his. "You're free," he said softly. "Truly free." The words seemed to hang in the air, almost too momentous to absorb. After 5 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of assuming new identities and leaving before connections could form, it was over. She could be Rebecca again. Could build a life, put down roots, look toward a future instead of constantly fleeing the past. The full impact hit her in waves, and Rebecca found herself laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. Blake's arms encircled her, holding her steady as she processed the reality of her freedom. "There's one thing the letter doesn't mention," Michael said, his tone becoming more serious. "Hollister. The marshals were sent to intercept him, but there's no confirmation they succeeded." Until we know he's in custody, we need to remain cautious. Blake nodded grimly. Agreed. I'll double the watch tonight just in case, but the precaution proved unnecessary. The following day brought news that Hollister and 4 of his men had been apprehended without incident near the Colorado-New Mexico border. The former Texas Ranger had surrendered when confronted with federal marshals and the governor's warrant, apparently recognizing that his network of influence could not extend to this new jurisdiction. "It's really over," Rebecca said that evening as she and Blake walked along the creek that bordered Michael's property. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." "Believe it," Blake said, squeezing her hand gently. "Hollister will face trial for his crimes. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and you—" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "You never have to run again." The certainty in his voice made Rebecca smile. "It will take some getting used to, this idea of staying in one place, of building something lasting." "I was hoping you might want to build something lasting with me," Blake said, his voice lower, more intimate. He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet pouch. "This isn't as fancy as what you might have had back in Texas, but—" From the pouch he withdrew a ring, a simple silver band set with a small but perfect sapphire that caught the evening light. "Rebecca Thornton," Blake said, taking her hand in his. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but in that time, you've shown me more courage, resilience, and genuine goodness than I've seen in most people over a lifetime. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days helping you build the life you deserve, one filled with safety, respect, and joy." Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she looked from the ring to Blake's earnest face. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "After everything I've been through, everything I've done." "More certain than I've ever been of anything," Blake said firmly. "You are not damaged, Rebecca. You're not defined by what was done to you or what you had to do to survive. You're defined by your strength, your kindness, your capacity for joy even after so much pain." His words reached deep into Rebecca's heart, addressing the doubts that had lingered even after her name was cleared. James had spent years convincing her she was broken beyond repair, unworthy of love or happiness. Yet here stood this remarkable man, seeing in her not damage but resilience, not brokenness but strength. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Blake Sullivan." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into an embrace that felt like coming home, Rebecca realized that the greatest freedom granted to her wasn't in the governor's pardon or Hollister's arrest. It was in this moment, in the choice to love and be loved, to trust and be trusted, to build a future unburdened by the ghosts of the past. Blake Sullivan had not only helped clear her name, he had helped her reclaim herself. 3 months later, Rebecca Thornton became Rebecca Sullivan in a small ceremony on the front porch of what was now their ranch, the property adjoining Michael's that Blake had indeed purchased. Judge Wilson himself performed the ceremony, having become a stalwart ally and friend during Hollister's trial, which had concluded with a 20-year sentence in a federal prison. "I've never seen 2 people more suited for each other," Judge Wilson declared during the simple ceremony. "Both tested by fire, both emerging stronger for their trials. May your union be blessed with the peace and happiness you've both earned through your courage and perseverance." As they exchanged vows, Blake's hand was steady holding hers, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," he said, his voice carrying clearly to all assembled. "To respect your strength while offering my own. To remind you every day that you are worthy of love, of happiness, of all good things this life has to offer." Rebecca, radiant in a simple ivory gown, felt tears of joy threatening as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to trust you with my heart, knowing you will guard it carefully. To build with you a home where truth and kindness are valued above all. To face each day with the courage you've helped me rediscover in myself." As Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, as Blake's lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their promises, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that the damaged, frightened woman who had fled Texas 5 years earlier was truly gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that wounds could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, that love could indeed overcome the deepest scars. In the years that followed, the Sullivan Ranch prospered under their joint care. Blake's natural affinity for the land and animals complemented Rebecca's organizational skills and determination. They built not just a successful business, but a true home, a place of warmth and welcome known throughout the region for its hospitality. Rebecca found herself drawn back to teaching, establishing a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighboring families. The joy she had found in education before James Thornton darkened her life returned tenfold, enriched by her own experiences of loss and redemption. And when, 2 years after their wedding, their son James Michael Sullivan was born, followed 18 months later by their daughter Elizabeth, Rebecca discovered new depths to her capacity for love and healing. Watching Blake with their children, his gentleness, his patient guidance, his unwavering support, she sometimes marveled at the distance she had traveled from those dark days of abuse and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked one evening, finding her on their porch, gazing at the sunset while their children played in the yard under Ellen's watchful eye. Rebecca smiled up at him as he settled beside her on the swing he had built when she was pregnant with James. "About journeys," she said, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "About how the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Blake's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Having regrets about marrying an old cowboy instead of settling back east with someone respectable," he teased. Rebecca laughed, the sound free and genuine in a way it hadn't been for most of her adult life. "Not a single one," she assured him, turning to meet his gaze. "Every step that brought me here, even the painful ones, was worth it for this life with you." As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Rebecca Sullivan reflected on the words James Thornton had once used to wound her most deeply. "You're too damaged to ever love or be loved properly. No man will want you once they know what you really are." How wrong he had been. The damage he had inflicted had not defined her. The wounds had healed, leaving scars that spoke not of brokenness, but of survival, of resilience, of the capacity to rebuild from ashes. And Blake, her steadfast, honorable Blake, had seen past those scars from the beginning, recognizing in her not damage but strength, not a victim but a survivor worthy of love and respect. Through his eyes, she had learned to see herself clearly again, to reclaim the woman she had always been beneath the fear and pain. As their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze, as Blake's hand found hers in the familiar gesture that still sent warmth through her after all these years, Rebecca knew the truth that had saved her. Love did not demand perfection. It did not require unblemished pasts or unwounded hearts. True love, the kind she and Blake had built together, saw scars as evidence of battles fought and won. It recognized that damage was not destiny, that wounds could become wellsprings of compassion and understanding. It offered not a magical erasure of the past, but a hand to hold while walking into the future. "I love you," Blake murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. "And I love you," Rebecca replied, the words simple yet profound in their truth. "Today and all days to come." In that moment, with her family gathered close and her heart at peace, Rebecca Sullivan understood completely what Blake had tried to tell her all those years ago. She had never been too damaged to love or be loved. She had simply been waiting for the right person to help her remember how to do both.